I'd like to thank our witnesses for taking time out of their busy schedules to come share their expertise and perspectives on the Fix Our Forests Act, H.R. 471, which the House passed for the second time by an overwhelming vote of 279 to 141 in January 2025, just a month or so ago. We know wildfires are indifferent to federal, state, tribal, and private property jurisdictions, and we've all seen the destruction catastrophic wildfire can cause on our rural and urban communities. Just this week, we're witnessing fires threatening lives and property in the Carolinas, and unfortunately, recent history is replete with incidents illustrating the devastating impacts fires have on our communities, from the 2018 Camp Fire in Paradise, California, to the 2023 Lahaina fires in Maui, Hawaii, to the 2025 Southern California fires as well. In order to treat an issue, first, we must identify the symptoms, diagnose the root cause of the problem, and implement scientifically sound treatments. The loss of human life and property from these fires are an acute and painful symptom of a disease that is not working. The cause of these fires is rooted in misguided policies that go all the way back to the Forest Service 1930s so-called 10 a.m. policy, which requires all fires to be extinguished by 10 a.m. the day after they're discovered. These causes have been compounded by the federal government's inability or unwillingness to treat the right acres at the right time, at the right scale, over numerous administrations. Treating this problem comes in the form of an all-of-the-above approach to modernizing the federal technological toolbox for assessing and identifying wildfire risk, facilitating early response and suppression, and updating the public-private partnership model for federal, state, tribal, county, and private landowners to address fire risk rather than jurisdictional or political subdivision boundaries. Every fire is unique. My dad was the chief of a fire department for years before becoming chief of police, and indeed, he would tell me every fire was very unique. But the most catastrophic fires all have similarities. Proper management of our nation's forest lands can help prevent a small spark from turning into a raging fire with devastating consequences. My own state of Kansas is not immune to wildfire. In 2021, strong winds and dry air combined to create ideal conditions for wildfires in the grasslands of Kansas and central Kansas in the Ford County's fire. That fire was clocked at over 180 miles an hour at the top of wind turbines sailing through those prairies. Not all management methods for the grasslands of Kansas mirror what the science tells us should be conducted on forested acres, but the important role of proper management on our landscapes ring true for both. The Fix Our Forests Act, which we'll call FOFA for the rest of the hearing, is a rare bipartisan opportunity for Congress to provide the United States Forest Service, the Department of the Interior states, tribes, counties, and private partners with a modernized and streamlined toolbox to fight fire, regardless of one another's views on the appropriate use of federal lands and resources. We all need to help mitigate the frequency and intensity of catastrophic wildfires while ensuring the scientifically sound and sustainable stewardship of our federal lands. The Fix Our Forest Act provides agencies with critical needed and appropriately calibrated increases in the acreage limitations for categorical exclusions to forest managers, increases which agency analysis have been shown will help provide the flexibility to better address forest management. To be clear, categorical exclusions are not a free pass for an agency to go in and clear out forest and clear-cut forest, as some are led to believe. They are one way for federal agencies to comply with the NEPA based upon extensive uses of prior environmental assessments that show no significant effect and are still subject to the scoping before moving forward. FOFA instructs the federal government to identify at the fireshed scale the top 20% of fire sheds that are at risk for fire exposure over the next 5 years in order to better focus limited resources. FOFA permanently fixes in statute the disastrous Ninth Circuit's Cottonwood decision, which the Obama administration petitioned the Supreme Court to overturn. It's led to delays in management projects through unnecessary and duplicative scoping in an attempt to avoid frivolous litigation. FOFA also adopts litigation reforms used by past Republican and Democratic administrations in statute to limit litigation delays to essential projects. And FOFA strengthens good neighbor authority, a critical and overwhelmingly successful program that has allowed local and state partners the ability to supplement the work to Forest Service is not able to do on their own lands. I'm honored to recognize Ranking Member Senator Michael Bennett for his comments.
Thank you, Chairman. And Chairman, I don't know if you'd like to go before me. I'd be happy. Are you sure? All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here. And Chairman Marshall, thank you so much for your partnership and for coming to Colorado last year to have a hearing. I hope we can repay the visit. I'd like to thank you for your leadership in organizing today's hearing, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us today. My message is simple, and it's if we are committed to the health of our forests and our watersheds, the federal government must be a more reliable partner for communities and local governments. In Colorado, our national forests underpin our economy and our way of life. Our forests and watersheds protect our water supplies, support agriculture, drive outdoor recreation, and sustain diverse wildlife habitats. But today they're facing unprecedented threats. Drought and wildfire, of course, are at the top of the list. In the West, wildfire season is no longer a season, but a year-round reality for all our communities. These wildfires don't just burn trees. They endanger lives, they devastate communities, and they destroy critical infrastructure. And the effects of western wildfires aren't just felt in Colorado, but across the entire country. Colorado's national forests and their watersheds supply water to 19 states and parts of Mexico. They are the source of water for tens of millions of people, farmers, ranchers, from the Mississippi Delta to California. Water is our lifeblood in the West, and our national forests are the source of their supply. Without that water, there's not a single town or city in my state that would exist. There's not a county that would exist. There's not a farm or a ranch that would exist. And the health of our watersheds and the health of our forests are exactly the same thing. You cannot have one without the other. We need to be thoughtful about our approach to managing our forests. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work. Top-down management without the input of local communities and forestry experts risks harming our economy, our sensitive habitats, and the water supply that we are trying to protect in the West. As we'll discuss today, Colorado has a long track record of successful collaborative forest management projects that bring together local and federal partners, including the timber industry, local governments, scientists, tribes, and conservationists. As wildfire risk increases across the West, the federal government should empower those types of partnerships and make their work easier, not harder. Unfortunately, taking a chainsaw to the Forest Service workforce and funding makes life harder for Coloradans, makes harder for citizens in the West, and it does nothing to advance local forest management and partnerships. Axing the dedicated public servants who manage our national forests isn't just short-sighted, it is downright dangerous. Much of Colorado is already in drought, months before summer has even started. Right now, snowpack is below average in all but one of our major watersheds, and temperatures have hit record highs over the weekend, reaching 10 to 15 degrees above the historical average. Whether it's the Fix Our Forests Act or any other piece of legislation, it won't matter what we do here in Congress if the administration is simultaneously undermining our land management agencies and withholding the resources they need to do their jobs. I appreciate the goals of the Fix Our Forests Act, which we will discuss more today. I really do. If done thoughtfully, reducing wildfire risk through active management is an important goal. And by the way, we're running out of time. But I worry that the bill, as it's currently written, places an unreasonable burden on communities and ties the hands of local governments, potentially undermining the collaborative approach needed to move forest management projects forward. I recognize that the wildfire crisis affects us all, and we have a responsibility to find a bipartisan solution. I'm ready to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to advance legislation that includes the forest policy challenges investments that are needed to reduce wildfire risk and improve the federal government's work with states, local, and tribal partners. After all, they're called national forests for a reason. Over the last decade, we have spent $6 billion on wildfire risk reduction work and $38 billion, 6 times that much, on wildfire response and recovery. It just makes sense, Mr. Chairman. It takes $50,000 an acre to fight a fire. It's a lot cheaper to be able to do it on the front end than that. If we do not invest now in wildfire mitigation and watershed restoration and the federal workforce tasked with doing that work, it will cost us hundreds of billions of dollars a year in firefighting and recovery costs in the coming decade, to say nothing of the damage to our infrastructure, to our way of life. I've told Chuck Schumer over and over and over again, Mr. Chairman, these national forests are more important to us from an infrastructure perspective than the Lincoln Tunnel is to New York. He doesn't necessarily agree with that, but it's true. Don't tell him I said it. So we have to get serious about this. No level of government can tackle this alone. I am very grateful, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing today, and I look forward to hearing from our excellent witnesses and working with my colleagues at both parties to protect our forests, our communities, and our future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Bennett. Unfortunately, we don't not able to have a representative from USDA here to testify on the Fix Our Forests Acts. However, the committee has received written testimony from the USDA detailing the Forest Service's views of the legislative proposal, as well as additional letters of support. I request unanimous consent to submit this testimony and these letters for the record as part of my opening statement. Without objection, so ordered. We'll turn to our introductions now. Senator Schiff's not here, so I'm going to introduce Mr. Matt Weiner. Matt Weiner is the CEO and founder of Megafire Action, the first nonprofit organization focused solely on advancing policy solutions to the megafire crisis. He has held senior roles in the U.S. Congress and California State Legislature, most recently as the Executive Director of California's Democratic Congressional Delegation in the House of Representatives, where he was responsible for advancing the delegation's statewide policy priorities. And next, I believe the ranking member is going to introduce 2 of his constituents from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's my pleasure to introduce the 2 witnesses that I invited to testify at today's hearing. Both witnesses are incredibly knowledgeable and understand the importance of forest management and the work that goes into stewarding our public lands. I've invited them to be here today to speak about their experience in wildfire mitigation and to share their perspectives on the importance of investing in land management projects and agencies. Our first witness, Commissioner Jonathan Haug, is currently serving as Gunnison County Commissioner, a position he has held since 2013. He is a lifelong public servant. Well, actually, it says long-time public servant, but I also know he's a lifelong public servant. First serving on the City Planning and Zoning Commission, then for 2 terms on the Gunnison City Council, which included serving as mayor. I've known Commissioner Haug for over a decade, and he's been kind enough to invite me to his county over and over again to hike, camp, and fish numerous times. One of the first things you notice about when you visit Gunnison County, which is, by the way, about 1.5 times the size of the state of Delaware, is that its national forests are foundational to its economy and core to the identity of the people who live there. Forests in Gunnison County supply timber to the last remaining timber mill on the western slope, attract visitors from around the world with over 1,000 miles of trails, and produce oil and gas and coal. I can't think of anybody better here to talk about the value of forests to rural western communities. And I thank also Frank Baum, who's here as well, who's here as well. Mr. Bem formerly served as the regional forestry for the Rocky Mountain region, where I had the pleasure of working with him. He's now a member of the board of directors for the National Association of Forest Service Retirees. Mr. Bem has worked at every level of the Forest Service, starting his first role as a seasonal forestry technician in the Rio Grande National Forest and later serving as a legislative specialist in the Washington office. Notwithstanding that experience, he was willing to come here and testify. These are just two examples among the many other roles that have given him the unique perspective to understand the deep importance of the work done at all levels of the Forest Service. We are delighted that he's here today, and Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thank you, Senator Bennett. I'm going to next introduce Mr. Tim Brindenberg. Originally from Southwest Oregon, for the last 20 years, he's assisted private landowners and Indian tribes manage forest lands while navigating challenging issues like wildfire, endangered species, and an ever-changing regulatory landscape. Since 2012, he served as the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians as their Director of Forest Management. In his current capacities, he's working to develop an expanded timberland base that will provide for the cultural and economic well-being of the tribe for many generations to come. Next, I'd like to introduce Mr. Robert Gordon. Mr. Gordon is the Senior Vice President, Policy Research and International for the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. He's responsible for working the association's members to develop and frame public policy positions on the opportunities and challenges facing the property casualty insurance industry at the state, federal, and international levels. Previously, Mr. Gordon was the parliamentarian, senior counsel, and ethics compliance officer for the Committee on Financial Services in the U.S. House of Representatives. And now we'll turn to our witness testimony. Again, thank you to all the witnesses for being here and the time preparing. Mr. Weiner, you're now recognized for your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Marshall, Ranking Member Bennett, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Matt Weiner, and I'm the founder and CEO of Megafire Action, a nonprofit organization founded on a simple premise. Megafire is solvable, and therefore policymakers have an obligation to do more to solve it. As we saw in January, the megafire crisis is continuing to accelerate, and our systems are continuing to be overwhelmed year after year. This is a nonpartisan emergency that requires a bipartisan response, and the Fix Our Forest Act is an excellent place to start. Before I dive into the support for the bill, I want to make one thing clear. We cannot fix our forests if we have nobody to fix our forests. For decades, we've completely failed our workforce, especially our wildland firefighters who've been asked to do too much with too little for far too long. The current firings and freezings are only making things worse, but this is a long-standing problem. It's appalling that we're continuing to put our firefighters in this position, and a permanent, well-resourced federal wildfire workforce remains an urgent need, and Congress should step in to stop the bleeding. Onto the bill. There's a lot to like about the Fix Our Forest Act, but we see it largely as focused on two challenges: permitting reform and technology adoption, both essential to scaling up effective wildfire mitigation. Let me start with permitting reform. We know selective thinning in prescribed fire can restore ecosystem balance and reduce risk, yet we're nowhere near meeting the scale that's needed. Last year, the Forest Service treated 800,000 acres of the highest risk landscapes, which was a record high, but is still far short of the millions of acres a year needed to reach our targets. And we know that treatment saves money. Senators have before you a slide deck from our friends at Vibrant Planet that underscores the value of mitigation investments. A recent analysis by them found that $76 million in projects protected $2.1 billion in structures. The ROI is undeniable. One major barrier to this is the slow and costly permitting process. The Forest Service estimates that planning and assessments consume 40% of direct work and can frequently lead to years of delays in getting projects off the ground. I do want to note that there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about changes to NEPA. Lessons forged in the timber wars will not and should not be easily forgotten, but the facts on the ground have changed, and our policies need to adapt. And we've seen that cutting red tape can get results. The 10,000-acre categorical exclusions for fuels reduction in the Lake Tahoe Basin sped up treatment, helping stop the Caldor fire before it reached South Lake Tahoe. After losing 20% of the world's giant sequoias to wildfires, the Forest Service expedited NEPA review in 2022, enabling the Giant Sequoia Lands Coalition to treat 54% of groves within just a few years. Just last week, President Trump and Gavin Newsom both took emergency action to remove regulatory hurdles and accelerate fuels treatment on public lands. The people in charge of managing risk understand that they need to get at this problem. And the Fix Our Forest Act complements these emergency declarations by codifying in statute a process to ensure that these efforts are targeted and successful. The bill expands limits on CEs from 3,000 to 10,000 acres, providing land managers with flexibility to move beyond small, random acts of mitigation and towards strategic, landscape-level projects needed to move the needle in a serious way. By focusing on the highest risk landscapes and the most impactful treatments identified through the fireshed assessments, the reforms in this bill target the most critical work on the ground. Over the last few years, we've seen an explosion of technology companies offering solutions at every phase of fire. This isn't a hypothetical where we need to go, but the scalable technology already exists to make taxpayer-funded programs more effective and help us reach our goals faster, cheaper, and better. And yet, these tools remain fragmented across more than 50 federal programs with strained budgets, leaving the government unable to effectively deploy tech for those who need it most when they need it most. The Fix Our Forest Act addresses this by creating a Fireshed Center to improve wildfire decision-making across prevention, suppression, and recovery. There's currently no single entity responsible for evaluating, understanding, and acting on risk across jurisdictions and landscapes in the United States. Like a combat support agency at DoD, this center will integrate real-time intelligence, predictive modeling, and risk assessments to support firefighters, land managers, and communities. And we need to ensure that the agency is built to move fast. Beyond the center, we strongly support the Wildfire Technology Testbed program in the bill to spur private sector innovation. Scaling these solutions quickly is absolutely critical. To maximize impact, Congress should consider expanding this provision to include deployment and authorize existing funds for wildfire technology acquisition. In conclusion, the Fix Our Forest Act will move the federal government towards a more proactive, science-driven approach to wildfire management. The bipartisan effort led by Chairman Westerman and Representative Peters has produced a solid product, and I look forward to working with the committee to strengthen and refine this bill to maximize its impact. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bim, you're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Bozeman, Ranking Member Klobuchar, Chairman Marshall, Ranking Member Bennett, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify today. I'm Frank Bim, and I serve on the board of directors of the National Association of Forest Service Retirees. We are a nonpartisan, professional, and science-based organization comprising over 900 Forest Service retirees and associates dedicated to adapting to the challenges of today and tomorrow. Our members understand the importance of fiscal responsibility, efficiency, and cost reductions. But we are gravely concerned about the impacts to essential services caused by recent actions to cut the Forest Service field-going workforce. Steeper cuts to staff and programs are expected, which will significantly impede the ability of the agency to deliver critical goods and services to the American people. This includes the work outlined in the Fix Our Forest Act. I retired from the Forest Service in May of 2024, 43 years after my first day as a seasonal forestry technician. I worked in the woods, thinning tree stands with a chainsaw, marking timber sales, and taking care of wilderness and recreation areas before I moved into leadership roles, as Senator Bennett mentioned. Turning to the Act, in January 2024, NAFSR and 36 other organizations representing millions of outdoor enthusiasts sent a letter to Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries supporting the Fix Our Forest Act. This legislation would provide land managers with tools desperately needed to strengthen the role of states, tribes, local government, collaborative groups, and other partners in forest management. It will help the Forest Service staff plan and implement more projects to reduce the threat of the wildfire crisis. However, recent cuts imposed by the Department of Government Efficiency will make it very difficult to deliver on the promise of the legislation. These indiscriminate reductions, along with nearly 1,000 staff who took deferred resignations, are hollowing out the agency and jeopardizing the future of America's forests. Ranchers, miners, loggers, campers, hikers, skiers, hunters, anglers, and people who just simply value clean drinking water will feel the impacts. Over 180 million people in more than 68,000 communities rely on national forests for their drinking water. Spending by visitors to national forests and grasslands contributes about $10.3 billion annually to the U.S. economy and sustains more than 140,000 family wage jobs that are the foundation of many rural communities. All of this is at risk due to sweeping random staffing cuts that threaten the future of our public land heritage. I have several examples to share. Approximately 3,400 Forest Service employees with less than 1 year of service in their positions, mostly field-going forestry technicians, were designated for firing simply because they were easy targets. Many of those fired were military veterans, hired through special authorities as a recognition of their service to our country. More than 75% of those dismissed employees had wildland fire qualifications, including on-the-ground firefighting, not just support roles, but on-the-ground, boots-on-the-ground firefighting. A couple other quick examples. 6 of 7 members of a timber strike team in the Rocky Mountain region were fired, and several individuals hired to work on Hurricane Helene recovery in North Carolina and Georgia were also fired. Now, some of these employees that were hastily fired are being brought back to do important work. But please don't underestimate the uncertainty, that this uncertainty has damaged morale and slowed work in wildland fire prevention, timber management, and fire and storm recovery. As a result, thousands of communities will face greater wildfire risks as planned fuel reduction projects will go uncompleted. Businesses reliant on forest-related goods and services will suffer, and the agency will struggle to meet the administration's goal of wood independence. The Forest Service, of course, works for the executive branch, and the Forest Service is always adjusted to priorities of incoming administration. Some of these cuts will make it difficult to do so. If the Forest Service continues to be hollowed out and can no longer provide essential services, there may be calls to move these lands to states, counties, or private ownership. President Teddy Roosevelt had it right. Public lands belong to all Americans and should be managed under federal protection. Public lands held in public trust is a uniquely American ideal, and they are the envy of the world. Forest Service employees are real people, family, friends, and neighbors, dedicated to caring for the land and delivering services to the American people. They are dedicated public servants who protect and conserve these lands. Without them to do their work, our natural heritage will be lost, and the intent of Fix Our Forests Act cannot be delivered. I want to just leave you with 2 thoughts. One, we strongly support Fix Our Forests Act, and we're concerned that the Forest Service will not be able to deliver upon that act with some of these, without critical resources and staff. With that, I thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vim. Mr. Vrindenberg, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Marshall, Ranking Member Bennett, and respected members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Tim Vredenberg, and I serve as the Director of Forest Management for the Cow Creek Umpqua Tribe of Indians located in Roseburg, Oregon. I'm here to express the tribe's support for H.R. 471, the Fix Our Forest Act. We believe that this legislation is a critical step in addressing the ever-growing wildfire crisis. The Cow Creek Umpqua is a tribe of just over 2,000 members. Their lands are nested in a checkerboard of private, state, and mostly federal lands. Over the last 10 years, catastrophic wildfires have burned nearly 20% of their reservation and 1.1 million acres of their ancestral area. The majority of the highest intensity fires have been on the federal lands in the areas that excluded management. Fires are returning to the same places 2, 3, even 4 times, destroying the native ecosystems and replacing them with invasive species. Our beautiful places, once lush, green forest, clean, cold water, places that I spent time with my family, hunting, hiking, fishing, they're destroyed. These fires have decimated tribal lands and driven tribal members from their homes again and again. This is why the Cow Creek Tribe is committed to an approach of forest management, not just on their lands, but on the neighboring federal lands as well. You see, historic conditions, which were guided by tribal management, supported 35 to 50 trees per acre with scattering of open meadows. Today, many areas have over 1,500 trees per acre. This has exceeded the carrying capacity of our forests. It's created unprecedented fuel loads, destabilized above-ground carbon, and limited water resources. Fires that once burned in a beneficial way now explode in catastrophic infernos that burn so hot that they completely sterilize the soil. We need regulatory certainty. The Cottonwood decision has created uncertainty for our land managers. The Fix Our Forest Act addresses this and presents an opportunity to update woefully out-of-date land management plans. Agencies fail to do plan revisions because it takes too much time and they're too expensive. One of the biggest challenges we face is the lengthy bureaucratic review process. We need to streamline this process, and we must implement forest restoration projects at a landscape scale. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of land just around the Cow Creek Reservation that need treated right now. We appreciate that the Act expands categorical exclusions to allow for projects up to 10,000 acres, that it modifies the Good Neighbor Authority, empowering tribes to reinvest in future forest restoration projects, and that it acknowledges the value of cultural burning. The tribal provisions are a good start, and it's worth exploring new ways to leverage the passion, expertise, and the fervent will of our tribal partners. If asked and activated, tribes can vastly improve and amplify the quality and impact of the federal land managers. This is not just about our forests, it's about clean water, healthy air, wildlife, recreation, and livable communities. Each catastrophic fire that burns leaves behind degraded soils, damaged fish habitats, hazardous smoke that fills the lungs of our children. Approach the crisis with innovation and out-of-the-box thinking. Consider expanding the law to protect even more forest. Specifically, the Forest Service should consider the proximity of tribal lands when designating high-priority fire sheds, not just a structure count. This has to be a bipartisan effort. Unnecessary controversy surrounding forest management has become the kryptonite of forest health. We need to fundamentally rethink how we manage our federal forest lands. To save our forests, we must manage them, and we must manage them in their entirety. Tribes have long been stewards of these lands. We must move beyond the short-term fixes and embrace real, large-scale solutions. I urge the members of the committee on both sides of the aisle to pass meaningful legislation that empowers those of us on the ground to act quickly, because we can break free of this cycle of catastrophic wildfire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brandenburg. Mr. Hauk, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Marshall and Ranking Member Bennett and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today, especially at this key moment of crisis for our federal land management agencies. I'm a county commissioner representing Gunnison County, Colorado, and like most residents of Gunnison County, I am dedicated to the stewardship of our cherished federal public lands. Gunnison County comprises 2.1 million acres, 1.7 of which are federal public lands managed by the Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and the National Park Service. To put that in perspective, as Senator Bennett did, we are 1.5 times the size of the state of Delaware, and 80% are federal public lands. Gunnison County public lands are home to the state's largest body of water, the largest coal mine, a ski area, and source of the marble that was used for the Lincoln Memorial and Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Gunnison County is headwaters of the Gunnison River, the second largest tributary to the Colorado River system. In Gunnison County, our public lands are everything to us. They are the foundation of our economy, our culture, our values, and our way of life. We take seriously our commitment to working with our federal partners to support stewardship of these public lands, not only for the residents of Gunnison County, but for all Americans, and not just for today, but for the future as well. I have submitted written testimony expressing my views on the Fix Our Forests Act, and I appreciate you making that part of the record. As I explain more fully in my written testimony, the bill is a compilation of a variety of provisions, making technical amendments to a variety of forest laws, codifying existing programs, granting new authorities, fine-tuning directions, and calling for new studies, many of which would be helpful improvements. It also includes a variety of NEPA categorical exclusions, restrictions on judicial review, and limitations on consultations under the ESA that would be harmful to the science-based community collaboration that has been the hallmark of our success in public land decision-making in Gunnison County. We depend on NEPA to guarantee that our community has a seat at the table to work in an informed and cooperative manner with the Forest Service to generate the best alternatives for achieving desired conditions in our forest. We depend on proactive approaches to conserving species so we can avoid listing them. And while litigation is an extremely rare occurrence, we know that none of that is possible if the rule of law and the potential for its enforcement by the courts is not respected. Our situation in Gunnison County is both illustrative and not unusual. As just two examples, we've collaboratively developed in recent years two significant projects to increase forest resilience and provide wood products to the market. The Taylor Park Vegetation Management Plan and a spruce beetle aspen decline project were both designated to be implemented over a decade and cover tens of thousands of acres of national forest land. They were collaboratively developed under NEPA and in accordance with the ESA with a broad group of local stakeholders. Those laws are not the problem. Forest Service capacity to implement them is the problem. And those who know the Forest Service already knew the agency had a significant staffing crisis. The firing of hundreds of staff in Colorado over the last few weeks has intensified that crisis considerably. In Gunnison County alone, between probationary firings and the hiring freeze for both open positions and seasonal employees, the Forest Service alone is short more than 50 employees that are critical to carrying out the most basic of operations. This is significant and represents the issues in just one of Colorado's 64 counties. Those fired and those seasonal employees who have had their upcoming contracts rescinded are hardworking Americans that mark timber sales, clear trails, perform fire patrol, issue grazing permits, prepare mineral leases, clean bathrooms, and assist visitors. We must stop this destruction and repair the substantial damage that's already been done as the first critical priority. If not stopped, these efforts will destroy our federal land management agencies and ultimately the communities, like mine, that depend on them to manage our public lands. In other times, the issues compiled in the Fix Our Forests Act would be of significant interest to Gunnison County. But right now, and I know I can speak for many of my fellow county commissioners in Colorado and perhaps many across the West, there are critical things we need from Congress regarding our public lands. Here's what we desperately need from Congress for our public lands. We need leadership to stop the destructive, arbitrary, and inhumane firings over federal land managers. Work with communities to identify areas for increased efficiency and increased capacity. It's worth noting when seasonal personnel are not hired, that impact actually ripples into the private sector since their other seasonal employment is often tied to other essential needs in our small rural communities. Additionally, don't discount the gut punch to morale to those who have not been eliminated and the increased anxiety created by the current administration's approach to staffing. Finally, what's happening now with the firings and the upcoming reduction in force actions will have a lasting and chilling effect on the future of those contemplating a career of service in our public land agencies. If the true goal is to fix our forests, then please start by fighting for the restoration of the most basic staffing levels, both full-time and seasonal, to do the good work already underway. Existing timber sales, planned vegetation management actions, grazing permit renewals, and other already approved actions that will contribute to healthier forest, better outcomes, and less wildfire are in jeopardy right now because the workforce that carries out those operations has been decimated. We cannot fix our forests without a skilled, dedicated professional workforce, not only at the Forest Service, but also at the BLM and the Park Service. This is the critical work that desperately needs attention. None of this should be controversial or partisan. It's certainly not in Gunnison County. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Houck. And next, Mr. Gordon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Marshall and Ranking Member Bennett, thank you for holding today's hearing. I'm Robert Gordon, the Senior Vice President of Policy Research and International for the American Property Casualty Insurance Association. APCIA represents over 2/3 of the United States home auto and business property casualty insurance market. And APCIA strongly supports the bipartisan Fix Our Forests Act. The California wildfires earlier this year caused between $95 and $275 billion in economic losses, one of the worst wildfire events in history. Insurers have already expedited over $6.9 billion in payments to help families and businesses recover, and we expect to ultimately provide between $40 to $50 billion in relief. That's roughly 3 times the homeowner's premiums for the entire state for the entire year, and the regular summer fire season has not yet even begun. Now, wildfires are endemic in the United States. There's an average of roughly 70,000 wildfires per year over the last 4 decades. But catastrophic wildfire losses to communities, known as conflagrations, have dramatically escalated. Conflagration losses over the last decade caused 5 times as much damage as in prior decades. Now, there are a number of reasons those losses are increasing so much. A majority of new homes are being built in areas that are at high fire risk, particularly in the wildland-urban interface next to forests and other natural landscapes. In fact, in just the last year, residential property exposures in the United States at high risk of wildfire losses increased nearly 23% in just 1 year. Inflation, particularly for building materials and lumber, has skyrocketed. The estimated cost of replacing all the buildings in the United States more than doubled over the last decade. Worsening weather severity is exacerbating precipitation and drought cycles that increase dry brush and fuel loads. So the climate's having a particular impact on wildfires. Legal system abuse is compounding the disaster costs, and we're now seeing 87% of wildfires are caused by humans, accidentally or intentionally, with an increasing number of the costliest and deadliest wildfires triggered by utility equipment sparking during severe winds. Without more proactive mitigation, disaster preparedness, and better coordinated response, these factors are going to continue to drive escalating wildfire losses, damaging ecosystems and the environment, and putting upward pressure on the cost of homeowners insurance and the cost of government disaster aid. Insurers are doing our part to develop solutions. Insurers have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, IBHS. IBHS has developed safety and mitigation standards for properties, including fortified standards to protect against wind and wildfire prepared home standards to protect against conflagrations. Insurers also participated in the congressionally established Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission, including our APCIA CEO, and they made over 100 recommendations, including support for the IBHS wildfire safety standards. And the Fix Our Forests Act incorporates many of those recommendations, including requiring government coordination for wildfire prediction, response, and recovery, supporting local adoption of fire-resistant building methods, codes, and standards, encouraging better fuel reduction, and supporting more resilient utility infrastructure. Those are all very important. Last December, Congress provided $110 billion in disaster assistance, and California just requested another $40 billion for January's wildfires. Unless we invest more upfront in wildfire mitigation, as both the chairman and ranking member have underscored, taxpayers are going to keep getting stuck with ever-increasing costs for disaster response and recovery. More people are going to lose their homes and communities, insurance losses are going to skyrocket, and housing will be less affordable. APCIA and insurers strongly support the bipartisan Fix Our Forests Act to make those upfront investments. The Act builds on extensive safety research by insurers, the IBHS, the Wildland Fire Management Commission, and would facilitate implementation of proven safety standards and needed government coordination. APCIA and insurers look forward to partnering with members of the subcommittee to advance this legislation and work on wildfire protections. We thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gordon. I'm going to ask just one question, and then we'll turn to the ranking member, and then I'll come back at the end and ask some questions if they weren't picked up. I want to start by recognizing the great work that Congressman Bruce Westerman from the state of Arkansas has done on this, as well as Congressman Scott Peters from California. Bruce is absolutely a subject expert on this, and he's been a great teacher, and I recognize the ranking member's expertise on this subject as well. I'll just have one question to start with, and it's for Mr. Vredenburg. Many people mischaracterize categorical exclusions as an end run around NEPA. Can you explain why larger categorical exclusions are critically needed and will help mitigate future catastrophic fires while still ensuring proper environmental reviews?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll give an example. The Cow Creek Tribe has a cooperative agreement under the Tribal Forest Protection Act, working with the Umpqua National Forest on attempting to restore and reduce the risk of fire to the Cow Creek Umpqua Reservation. As we approach that problem, it's a scale of hundreds of thousands of acres that we're trying to treat. What what we're practically doing is having to piece together small categorical exclusions because, traditional environmental assessments just take years and years to get through. Categorical exclusions aren't fast, but they're our most rapid solution to address the problem. So this, as we're looking at a watershed right now that's about 10,000 acres, we'd have to try and piece together several different categorical exclusions, trying to make sure they're not interdependent, interrelated, that we aren't stacking those, that there's separation, and it really ties our hands. And what practically happens is we don't get to treat the areas that need to be treated.
Thank you. I'll turn to Senator Bennett next.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As we were walking in here this morning, there was I think a federal court ruling someplace delaying the firings of the Forest Service employees that we're talking about at least for 45 days. That's I suppose a shred of comfort, but that is going to also add its own levels of uncertainty. And I wanted to ask Frank Bem and the Commissioner if you could tell us a little bit specifically how these staffing shortages, the hiring freezes, the recent round of fires are going to affect fire management on the landscape today. What do we need to worry about in terms of just this coming summer and the work that has to be taken to prepare us for that and to fight the fires that are coming? And Frank, when you talk about this, could you talk a little bit about the importance of red cards and what that means for people as well?
Yes, Senator, thank you. And as I mentioned in my testimony, about 75% of those who were removed, the probationary employees that were removed, have fire qualifications. They're given on a card that's red. That's why it's called red card. You have a red card that lists your qualifications you're trained to do. Most of those folks that were eliminated or dismissed during the probationary period are field-going forestry technicians that typically have some red card qualifications, often to do on-the-ground firefighting, not just support. We know primary firefighters with that in the position description were not removed, but collateral duty firefighters, which is a backbone of the fire suppression effort, as well as prescribed fire, were removed. So those are our red card employees. That's going to be a massive impact on the ability of the fire, I'm going to use the broader fire service, which is all the federal agencies, state agencies, and others, to do fire suppression work this year. It's going to have a pretty big impact. Thank you.
Commissioner Houck.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think, interestingly, the perspective I bring is someone who actually has the ability to day in and day out walk into the district ranger's office at the Forest Service or the BLM or the Park Service. And the big concern that we see in Gunnison County currently is that there are many already approved projects. So these are timber sales, these are habitat restoration projects, this is on-the-ground trail work that is mitigating fire danger that's approved for this upcoming year, and they don't have the staff on the ground to do these projects. And I'd like to maybe step back to a point that you made in your introductory comments. It's the partnerships and communities that make a difference. So for a good example, our trail crews are funded through state funds, through the Colorado Parks and Wildlife OHV funds, and that money comes to the Forest Service and allows them to do projects which include vegetation management. They cannot hire that trail crew even though the funding comes from a source other than the federal government. I'm hearing that from the foresters on our district, they will not have the forestry technicians to go out and mark the sales that are already approved, that have been through a NEPA process and are part of these larger projects that I spoke of in my opening comments. We have a lot of veterans that work on the forest in Gunnison County. A lot of these veterans have lost their jobs, and one thing that I'm really happy about to see in Colorado is how many veterans come to Colorado, connect to outdoor spaces, and the work that they do, the soul-satisfying work they do is connected to public lands. Some of them have lost their jobs as well. And so when I look at what we have on slate for just this coming summer, I have concerns that now we are going to start backlogging already a place where we are struggling to keep up due to the lack of resources before the firings. And I'd make one last comment that the deferred resignations, though not hugely impactful right in the Gunnison field office, but I think of the neighboring White River National Forest and the route, We had 2 folks that retired, 3 folks that retired, who were senior level, that when Type 1 teams need to be deployed for fires and things of that nature, they are the leadership that runs the team. And I would say, to Frank's comments about red card members, a lot of the folks that have been eliminated recently are red card holders, and they are part of the firefighting process in our community.
So I would just say to the chairman and to the chairman, the Secretary of Agriculture, who's from Texas, has said that she doesn't think that they've laid off or fired any firefighting personnel. You've heard today that's actually not the case, that Frank Bem described some of the people that have been laid off as the backbone of our firefighting efforts. And I think I would speak for everybody, if I can, for once, for Colorado, who's a Democrat or a Republican. We got to get these people back on the ground. We don't have 45 days to do the planning that's required. This is an emergency that we're facing today, and we would love your help in trying to at least pause this so that we can get to the other side of it. And by the way, I'll stop here. That does nothing to deal with the underlying problems that have existed in our western states for years in terms of paying firefighters what they're due to begin with. And we've got to find a way to work together to solve that problem as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Bennett. Chairman Bozeman.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you and Senator Bennett for the great job that you're doing with the subcommittee and your staffs. You really jumped in last year and this year and really are making a difference. So, and as always, it's great to be with our fearless leader, Amy. So we appreciate her in all ways. Well, I'm not talking about you, John. Mr. Gordon, as your testimony mentioned, there are more than 44 million homes in wildland-urban interface at risk of wildfire. Can you please talk about how the provisions of FOFA, including allowing hazardous tree removal within 150 feet of a utility right-of-way, can help address this problem and make communities safer? I've heard, in people discussing the bill, they wonder why are things like that in there? Why is that important?
It is very important. A lot of the federal wildfire programs are currently very fragmented, and it can be very challenging for all the individuals and communities and governments to navigate and access all of the wildfire resources. And so it's very important to have the FOFA to coordinate all the stakeholders and resources, support land use planning, adoption of building codes, supporting protection of critical watersheds and water delivery infrastructure. The various programs would also coordinate with the state and local agencies, including for grant assistance. So we think FOFA is very, very important and look forward to doing anything we can to help you advance it.
Very good. Senator Marshall mentioned the categorical exclusions that are part of NEPA and how increased, really ask about increased categorical exclusions, how they effectively help manage our nation's forests. Does anybody disagree with that on the panel?
Not me.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Senator. I wouldn't say I would disagree, but in doing my research for the presentation today and speaking with those at the agency, categorical exclusions are currently north of 80% of most projects are excluded from NEPA. Categorical exclusions are used and using those to not have to go through the full NEPA process. From someone on the ground at a local level, the concern is that moving further and further away for these larger projects from that community involvement, you start to lose the social engagement and the social license from the communities most directly impacted, and finding a way to make sure that categorical exclusions are handled in a way that is beneficial, but also, and they're a great tool, but I am concerned about the larger projects CEs being used to sidestep some of the good public participation that happens through a full NEPA process.
Are you concerned about the process being so cumbersome, though, that for some of these bigger projects, it's almost impossible to get done just because of the bureaucracy involved and the abilities to play the system in a different way.
Senator, thank you for that. I would respond that, you know, my experience in a rural western public lands county, that participation on the front end has been robust enough that we've seen less litigation. We've seen less kind of playing the system or gaming the system, sir, as maybe you referred to it. And I want to acknowledge that I think that that's a challenge to overcome. But I think my position, and as you'll see in my written comments that are much more in depth, the concern would be that by weakening that social license with communities, you'll actually potentially see more litigation and more things that hamstring these projects in the long run by not having that more robust public input up front that NEPA often affords, and at least for my community, I've noticed has been very beneficial.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, I think anybody that's been around this at all, is how different forests are managed throughout the country. So, you know, it's great that you've got a good experience and working hard, and you know, everybody kind of gets along, but that's certainly not the case every place. You know, so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Chairman. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Bennett, for this great and timely hearing. I wish we didn't have to focus on it because I wish we didn't have this many fires, but we are here and we need to do everything we can. I look at Senator Schiff there with what he and his constituents went through with the fires in California, what we've seen in Colorado, and we know that these fires pose the greatest threats in the West, but it's also important to know that these fires haven't spared other parts of the country. I remember flying in a helicopter over the forests of northern Minnesota and seeing the areas burn, 90,000 acres, which was the largest, the Pagami fire, largest Minnesota wildfire in nearly a century. Wildfires, including the Greenwood fire, once again burned across northern Minnesota. And of course, we've been, like so many of the northern states, have been, our people get the air from Canada from those horrendous fires that burned for months and months and months. I'm concerned that recent investments by Congress have led to the Forest Service that have been really important. The Collaborative Wildfire Risk Reduction Program, funding 2 projects in the Superior National Forest to reduce hazardous fuels and create strategic fuel breaks, which I'm sure agrees is just the kind of thing we need to be doing. Unfortunately, these projects and others carried out by the Forest Service and its partners have been disrupted due to the widespread funding freeze. And so I look forward to hearing from all of you today on this, but also on the Fix Our Forests Act, and ways we should strengthen the bill to ensure that wildfire responses are directed to the areas most in need, changes to the review process are targeted and allow for community input, Senator Bennett mentioned this, and that the Forest Service has the necessary funding and personnel to perform the additional and important wildfire mitigation. So my first question would be of you, Mr. Hawk. Can you discuss the importance of federal funding to accomplish more restoration work, and how does this assistance help counties and other local units carry out wildfire mitigation?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the question. Indeed, as I said in my opening comments, some of the lack of funding and lack of programs, the programs that are being funded are being well utilized, but there's still a shortage of funding and there's still a shortage of resources and capacity on the ground. And so many communities such as mine have had the ability to get projects into the pipeline. Funding and workforce tend to be the issues that get in the way of those. You know, the Good Neighbor Authority, it's very happy to see that. I know you've been a longtime champion of the Good Neighbor Authority.
Exactly.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
In Section 111.
Has like the best name of any bill.
And it's great to see that and I think that's a very positive info for that. It reinstates and restates what the Explore Act covered, which is counties and tribes have the ability to use the Good Neighbor Authority to its best extent. And I would also offer that funding of those kind of programs and expansion of those programs within communities then also allows us, and I think the insurance agent, the insurance businesses have seen this, when we can enact higher levels of local regulation around building and wildfire protections, we're leveraging these different inputs in our community for better things that our citizens can take advantage of, and then being able to create fire-wise communities, work in the WUI, and make sure that that work is done quickly and efficiently.
Mr. Bim, I've long supported permitting reform as long as it's done in the right way. Currently, many Forest Service projects are carried out using expedited permitting authorities, and any additional flexibilities, I'd like to see a focus on those facing wildfire risk. Are there targeted improvements to the permitting process this committee should consider that could lead to more active forest management?
Well, what I would say is that we have been working, when I was still working, we worked closely with Fish and Wildlife Service on ESA compliance and other issues with historic preservation, that we really do need to find ways to be more proactive, quicker in that work, and there are some efficiencies I believe we can find. I know the agency was working hard on that, and we could certainly do more with that.
So during your tenure as regional forester of the Rocky Mountain region, did you feel like the Forest Service having fewer staff and resources would help it accomplish more work? I know it's a really tough question.
Yeah, thanks for the softball. No, ma'am. And what I would say additionally is that if I were chief for a day, I'd flip the organization chart upside down and put the districts at the top of our organization. That's where the work's done. That's where we meet people. And these cuts that we've been talking about are just at the wrong place. They're cutting people on the ground that get the work done that we need to have done.
I get it. So if you could look at it, you know, as a manager, you would make them, and if you wanted to make some changes, you would do them in a different way than it's being done now?
Certainly would, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Weiner, in North Dakota, we have national grasslands. We have national grasslands both in the western part of the state, but also in the southeast part of the state as well. And we do a lot of grazing out there. So talk to me a little bit about your thoughts in regard to the dual benefits that livestock grazing can have, both in terms of promoting more fire-resistant, healthy landscapes, and, of course, at the same time, really helping our ranchers.
Yes, thank you for the There we go. Thank you for the question, Senator. I appreciate that. I think one great point that this brings up is that while the bill is called the Fix Our Forest Act, this is really about all types of landscapes impacted by fire. We think about chaparral landscapes that were impacted in the Los Angeles fires recently, and absolutely grazing landscapes like you have in North Dakota. One of the best tools that we have is grazing. And so we're really thrilled that the Fix Our Forest Act includes provisions to streamline authorities and approvals for targeted grazing projects, allowing cattlemen access to public lands for grazing in fire-prone areas. I think the other piece of this is the value of the Fireshed Center in helping states like North Dakota that have emergent wildfire risk understand what their risk profile is on the ground and act accordingly, right? I think a lot of the great work that's been done in the wildfire technology space in terms of understanding what's happening on the ground is being done at the state and local level with very well-resourced states and local governments. Other smaller states across the West are going to have a lot of catching up to do, and we think this center is going to be really helpful in helping.
Yeah, I mean, when these wildfires get going in the grasslands, I mean, we've had them burn down some small towns. Last year killed several people. So it's very serious, and we have to be able to address them. In a lot of cases, you know, we have the ranchers out there themselves, along with volunteer fire departments, trying to help, contain these fires. Of course, the state does a lot too with, helicopters and fire suppression and so forth. Wildfire seasons have turned into wildfire years, and costs have increased 82% to address it over the past decade. So talk a little bit about, in this legislation, what can you do in terms of cost savings and to really change that?
Yeah, well, I think that, first of all, the fact that we spend so much time with the permitting and planning side would be a problem at the Forest Service, even if it wasn't going through the crisis that it's going through right now.
Well, and talk specifically about permitting, how it's really going to work. President Trump issued an emergency action right now. How are you going to get permitting improved so it really works and is timely?
Yeah.
Does this bill do it? How does it do it?
I think this bill does do that. I think it does that through bringing a process to the emergency authority that is relevant to what President Trump announced and that Governor Newsom in California announced very recently. Good point. Does that mean you can get the bipartisan,
You had President Trump do it, and you've also had Governor Newsom do it.
Yes.
That really speaks to we ought to be able to pass this thing on a bipartisan basis and get this done, right? An actual solution in place, right?
Yes, Senator. The folks who are responsible for managing risk on landscapes, the executives out there, are moving in this direction in a bipartisan basis, and Congress should help put a process in place to make sure that it meets the desired goals.
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Gordon, I want to ask you about this interface where we have the urban areas encroaching on these forests, right? And that's happening all the time. And, you know, we just saw the dramatic, horrible consequences in California of that, you know, confluence of urban areas, you know, and these forests. So speak to what this bill does to really address that, a critically important and a life safety issue.
Yes, it is a growing issue, and to the extent that we're going to continue to build in these risky areas, and now a majority of new homes are being built in areas with wildfire risk, we have to do more wildfire safety preparedness and mitigation. And this bill makes the upfront investments that we need to do to save people, to make it more affordable long-term. It includes things like encouraging hardening existing homes with wildfire-resistant materials, removing hazardous fuels, vegetation management. You talked about grazing, so important to reduce those fuel loads. Programs to better coordinate the various federal programs and federal and state services. So this bill is really important to make the upfront investments to make those buildings insurable and affordable long-term.
Right on and very timely, very timely. So thanks to you, Mr. Chairman, and the ranking member for this hearing. Thanks to the witnesses.
Thanks, Senator Hoven. Senator Lujan is next.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Very much appreciate this hearing, and to all the panelists who are here today. Far too many communities in New Mexico and states across the country are terrified about fire season. And it's only getting longer. In 2022, the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire in New Mexico, which was started by the U.S. Forest Service as a controlled burn. Largest fire in the state's history, $1 billion of damages, cost New Mexicans their livelihoods. I was told at the time that prescribed burns don't get out of control. Very few, less than 0.1%. About 3 months later, we had a second one in New Mexico. Burnt another community up. All because folks didn't want to use the technology that was available, but just wanted to use their hands and their eyes and see if it was warm or not. We all know what happens when a stump catches on fire and it goes down deep. It stays smoldering. It does not get put out. And all it takes is a little bit of a breeze for it to kick up. I'm proud to have successfully led the New Mexico delegation in securing funding in a specific act because of the liability of the federal government. I'm still not happy at the pace that funding is flowing to people back home. That's a whole other conversation that we need to have. But once the fires do start, we have to have the people power and wildfire modeling capacity to contain and extinguish the flames. Mr. Weiner, thank you for calling attention to the Bipartisan Regional Leadership in Wildland Fire Research Act that I and Senator Sullivan and Sheehy and Padilla worked on together. And thank you for your work in assisting us to get this done. Can you speak to the importance of developing next-generation fire and vegetation models to support wildland fire management and rehabilitation?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your work on that legislation. We think that that piece of legislation is crucial on the wildfire side of the wildfire science side of this conversation, and we should think about how to make sure it's coordinating effectively with the Fireshed Center in this bill. You know, as you mentioned, wildfire behavior is changing rapidly. We're seeing facts on the ground change as the fires are burning, and we have the tools with advanced modeling to get a handle on how things are likely to play out and act accordingly. I think that your legislation and the Fireshed Center in particular can help enable that. I think it's important to also recognize a lot of the cutting edge work happening here is happening in the private sector. And they don't have a partner in the federal government to work on these issues effectively with right now. And so I think we do need to think about how we can enable the innovation happening in the private sector on advanced modeling and make sure that we put those tools in the hands of decision makers at every level as quickly as possible.
I appreciate that. I'm reminded that as a country, we spend billions of dollars improving our understanding of hurricanes and tornadoes. It might surprise a lot of people, but in New Mexico, we don't have a lot of hurricanes. But we don't invest at the same level for catastrophic fires.
Yeah.
I don't understand this. This is a part of America that's just been left out.
Yeah.
Well, now there's 3 Western senators on this committee, and I don't believe that's going to happen anymore. Mr. Weiner, why is it important that this modeling and technology is developed and targeted for specific regions of the country?
Yes, I think first to your point on hurricanes, historically hurricanes have been a bigger driver of damage in the United States. And so catastrophic fire, as we recognize it now, has only been around for a couple decades, and our systems have been slow to respond. A single hurricane hunter costs more than a decade of wildfire science research at the federal level. So we definitely need to catch up in that space.
I appreciate that. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, as regards to different landscapes, I think it's really crucial that we have a regional approach so that we can look at the difference in fire risk in places like Hawaii, in the Great Plains, where there's a very different risk, in chaparral-based landscapes in the Southwest, and comparing that to forested landscapes, all of which have different risk profiles, different things to need to look out for and understand if you're a manager. And so we think it's critical that we take a regional approach to that.
I appreciate that. Well, while I enjoy both beef and lamb, I'll just remind my friends that while cattle graze, sheep mow.
Yes.
So we might need some more of them on these grasslands as well.
Oh, sheep are a big part of it. We're supportive of that.
Well, we should talk about that. Well, I'm not going to get into the pricing of the meat, but I appreciate the question that Senator Bennett asked about staffing. You answered that question. It's a problem. I had a constituent from the southwestern part of New Mexico give me a holler because she was worried that her husband, who's a wildland firefighter, there was a freeze of hiring, and then people that he worked with were terminated. She said, if a fire happens, is he going to come home or not? I think we need to be thinking about that aspect of this. And I'd ask my Republican colleagues, look, any of you that hunt or fish, invite President Trump out west. Take him hunting and fishing so he can go into these wooded areas and take a look at them. I think we need to get a good understanding of the western part of America so that way we can be working on this stuff. This is common sense. It's not Democrat or Republican. This is about the United States. And the western members have been working closely together. I hope that, those of us that don't know each other well yet, I hope to get to know you. We'll invite you out. I'll take you fishing. I'll take you hunting. But you have to be comfortable hunting with the other person I mentioned, so that's up to you all. There's some other areas as well in recovery, Mr. Chairman. I hope we can talk to it at a later time. I'll submit them into the record. But now that we've had these devastating fires, I've been surprised that only New Mexico and Idaho have the ability to be able to produce the seedlings necessary for recovery here. We need to be looking at what we can be doing in this space so that way we're preventing, we have better tools to fight when this happens, but then we also look at recovery. So I hope that we can all talk about that. And then the last thing I'll say is don't forget about the flooding that happens for 5, 6, 10 years after a fire hits in the West, because it's equally devastating. We need to make sure that all the rules are updating themselves so that, or we can help update them so that people are not getting hurt because of that stuff. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Lujan, and I'll accept your invitation as long as it's fly fishing on a stream. Okay. I got to take my dad fishing this Sunday in the Flint Hills for the first time this spring, so it's always a great signal that spring is on the way. You bet. Senator Justice, thanks for your patience. You're recognized.
I'm new to the game in lots of ways. Thank you, sir. But I've got a lot of white hair, and I've been around a lot. And I can tell you, and absolutely, please let me accept the invitation as well, because there's nobody in here, nobody that's been in the woods or on the waters more than I. Nobody. I get it. I truly get it. The thing that is absolutely amazing to me is just this, is I would just say simply just this. Whether it be all of our unbelievable farmlands and the contribution of our small family farms, or whether it be our unbelievable forest that we're absolutely seeing right now, that we got a real problem and America needs to react. That's all there is to it. I mean, it's just as simple as just that. We got all the smarts in the world here to figure it out as to what to do, but we just won't react. We just think it's going to be okay. Well, it's not going to be okay. I mean, these fires absolutely are killing and I just wrote down just a couple of points here, but our air, our waters, our soil, our nutrients, absolutely our wildlife, and more than anything, our soul. Our soul. And that for those of us that have been on a stream with a fly rod in your hand, or seen the absolutely majesty of all the stuff of wildlife all around us, we're killing our soul, America. That's all there is to it. We've got to wake up. We've got to react. And not only do we have to react, but we've got to react within days almost. That's all there is to it when it really boils down to it. And here's a solution, that I can provide to you very quickly, from the standpoint of West Virginia. We've lost all of our cabinetry, and we've lost all of our furniture business, and we lost it to Vietnam and China and Mexico. It's gone. Well, absolutely. How do we get it back? I mean, think about this. In West Virginia, we cut a third of our growth. We don't manage our forest in West Virginia any better than the problems in the West. We got to do something. With all that being said, the canopy, we cut a third of our growth. Think about this just a second. What if we created some form of funding, whatever it may be, and said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to rate our states, and in this situation, West Virginia would rate really well, but we're going to rate our contribution. Do you know that when we take and cut a tree, and it turns into this right here, the carbon is frozen in this forever. The carbon doesn't go into the atmosphere, but if it falls down on the ground because we're not cutting but a third of our growth, and we're not managing our forest, and we get any kind of level of forest fire, and in West Virginia we get 800 a year. They aren't bad, but 800 a year. What happens to this carbon when the fire goes through? Poof, right back into the atmosphere. And we all absolutely are hair on fire about carbon in the atmosphere. So why don't we do something about it? Why don't we say, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to create some kind of management funding or whatever, and we're going to apply that towards labor back in states and rate it and scale it, and absolutely then bring our absolute furniture and cabinetry, manufacturing back to us instead of it being in another country. There's so many things we can be doing. The intelligence is all right here. We need to do it on a bipartisan, matter. Absolutely, without any question, we can do it, and we can do it right now. Absolutely. The question is, will America react? And with that being said, I would say I stand ready to work with anybody. I stand ready to accept that invitation too. And you'll see that I'm a hunter, I'm a fisherman, I'm a person that loves the outdoors, and I'm a person that wants to absolutely preserve our soul. And if we don't watch out, what we're doing right now is ludicrous. Let's figure a way to figure this out. And we need to do it right now. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Justice. And now it looks like that we have a contest to see who the second best fisherman in the Senate is. Senator Schiff, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. Matt, I'm sorry I missed the chance to introduce you earlier. Matt and I have known each other a long time when he served as the executive director of the California Democratic Congressional Delegation and advised our chair, Zoe Lofgren, Speaker Pelosi, as well as 42 Democratic members of the House on California policy, and appreciate how you brought that expertise to bear in trying to tackle this very difficult problem. We are seeing in California what Americans are seeing all over the country, that wildfires are now characterized by a longer fire season, by more massive size, by more acres burned every year. The loss of life in Altadena and the Palisades, the loss of homes and businesses was just devastating. And with the 100-mile-an-hour winds, it was just a irresistible force to be reckoned with. And I appreciate all of your efforts to try to improve our forest management so that we can reduce the chances of these fires, and the work that's being done on a bipartisan basis by my colleague Scott Peters from California and Congressman Westerman. I have concerns about the bill, which I think many Democrats in the House shared when this bill came before the House, that parts of the bill seem more focused on timber harvesting than they do on wildfire mitigation. They're not concerns that can't be overcome. There are, I think, good faith negotiations going on to try to make changes to the bill that would, I think, potentially dramatically expand support for the bill, and I'm hoping that we can get to yes on those changes. One of the reasons I think there is skepticism about the priority in the bill being more on wildfire and less on timber, or vice versa, is the issue that my colleague Senator Bennett was raising, and that is that so many of the actions we're taking right now are completely counterproductive, that have nothing to do with the need to change law, but they involve the laying off of firefighters, the hiring freeze on other firefighters, the termination of 3,400 employees at the Forest Service, the funding freeze affecting the halt of hazardous fuels reduction. All of this is moving us in the wrong direction. And so it's hard to make the case for the urgency of legislation when we're taking steps that are non-legislative that are moving us in the wrong direction. But I hope that we can both restore these employees and this workforce and this important work, and at the same time make improvements to the bill and get this moving. I'd like, if I could, I received a letter from the Loma Katsky Project, which I request unanimous consent to be entered in the record. I thank you. This project is a forestry and workforce development organization in Oregon and California. Their work has resulted in thousands of acres of hazardous fuels reduction, millions of feet of timber sent to mills, billions of dollars saved and avoided property damage and firefighting costs, and freezing the funds has really adversely impacted their efforts. The question I'd like to ask, and I'll throw it open to the panel, is first, how do we make sure that we're not making the problem worse with some of the actions we're seeing now? But second, how can we address some of the legitimate concerns that have been raised in the bill, that some of the provisions go beyond what would be necessary for wildfire prevention, and risk, without adequate public input, taking actions that really could hurt the very forest we're trying to save. So if you could comment on those efforts to negotiate some of those difficulties, and I yield to the panel.
Well, let's just be brief here. we're at 5 minutes, so maybe 1 minute for an answer here.
I can quickly speak to the last question, Senator, and thank you for the introduction. I found that when we engaged in the process with Chairman Westerman and Scott Peters, to a lot of raised eyebrows from a lot of the conservation community, what we found was an incredibly productive process and a good faith process in terms of working to identify some of those challenges you raised. I think we're really heartened that there's a bipartisan group of senators working to look at a Senate companion bill right now. But I think the bottom line for us is we think that it can continue to be improved in the Senate, and I think that we have good faith partners in the House to get that done and make sure that this bill does what it says it will do.
I thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we're obviously coordinating with my colleague, Senator Padilla, to try to be a constructive part of those negotiations. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Senator Schiff. Senator Warnock, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Many of my colleagues here today represent states that are at high risk for large-scale wildfires. But wildfires are not limited to the West. Atlanta is known as the city in the forest because of the city's dense tree canopy, and about 2/3 of Georgia is covered with forests, putting it at risk for wildfires. In fact, the National Interagency Fire Center predicts Georgia and much of the Southeast will be at above average risk for wildfires over the next couple of months. In the last week alone, Georgia has seen over 4,000 acres burned, and neighboring South Carolina's governor declared a state of emergency due to wildfires. Mr. Bim, what are some of the contributing factors that are increasing Georgia's wildfire risk?
Thank you for the question, Senator. You know, our weather patterns are certainly contributing to the wildfire risk. What we're seeing right now in the Carolinas, what we saw in Georgia, we saw at Gatlinburg, there's a number of things that were really quite frankly shocking. I worked in the South for a number of years and didn't anticipate those type of fires happening in the South, and they do. And climate change, probably a factor. There's a number of factors to that. In addition, the lengthening of the season, again, we don't really refer to fire seasons anymore, it's a fire year.
Right. I think climate change is clearly a contributing factor not only to wildfires. I can tell you something else that climate change is clearly causing is more frequent, larger, and stronger hurricanes. Last fall, Hurricane Helene ravaged the Southeast, including Georgia. I remember spending time on the ground with folks who had lost everything. Helene paved a path of destruction all the way from the bottom of the state to the top, taking down 8.9 million acres of timber with it. Mr. Bim, can you describe the increased fire risk fallen trees from stronger storms create?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. So anytime we have trees falling in the forest like that, they will start to decay, and you get a fire through there, and they will contribute to the intensity of that fire. In the South, that might take a year for those trees to dry out and be a large woody fuel for a fire, but regardless, that's a significant increased fire risk in the state because of the hurricane.
So given that risk, how important is swift cleanup?
Very important, sir.
And I ask that question because at this time of increased wildfires risk across the Southeast, the Trump administration is firing the very workers who are responsible for mitigating that risk through storm cleanup and proper forest management. Will these firings help or hurt Georgia's ability to mitigate wildfire risk?
As I stated earlier, sir, they will absolutely hurt the ability for Georgia to mitigate the fire risk.
I agree, and I think we need legislation to require our federal agencies take on more responsibility to address wildfires. But if Congress does not provide them with proper resources and adequate staffing, we're not setting them up for success. I look forward to working with my colleagues to address these shortfalls as we work towards a comprehensive wildfire strategy bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And I would add just one piece that through the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed in previous Congresses, the infusion to the Forest Service was generational money to address wildfire mitigation. Even so, $5 billion, north of $5 billion, that is a down payment in what's really needed. And I don't even know what the figure might be, 20 billion, 30 billion.
It's an important point, especially since there are efforts right now in Congress to take that back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Warnock. Senator Booker.
The grace and generosity of our chairman and our ranking member for letting a guy that is not on this subcommittee come in. But what a lot of folks in this room don't know is that New Jersey is a forest state. Yes, I'm glad you all know that. 40% of my state is covered by forests. And last year, we had some horrible, horrible forest fires. So I know a lot of attention is to the west of Jersey, but allow my Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen Jersey pride to come out here and come before you all right now. What my friend and brother Warnock were talking about, these catastrophic wildfires are being caused by climate change. This is because climate change has led to higher temperatures, extended droughts, earlier snow melt, which create higher, drier conditions for longer fire seasons, which we're all seeing, and even, again, worse conditions in New Jersey. And we know that to combat climate change, one of the things we need to do is actually preserve our existing forests. I've been working with our current Secretary of Agriculture, trying to continue a lot of our tree planting efforts, but especially our old growth forests, we just need to get more trees in the ground. We also need to engage in large-scale efforts to reduce the amount of hazardous fuel that has accumulated into our forests, as many people have testified today. Really, the massively scaling up of the amount of prescribed burns that we're doing, I think that's important. But unfortunately, we've seen with an executive order by the president, as well as this version of the Fix Our Forests Act, which passed the House, would do the opposite of this, and are instead focused on cutting down our forests, not planting more. And in order to fix this act, which I think it's important, as everybody said, how we work in a bipartisan way, I believe there's some changes that we need to make, and I want to mention a few. In Section 121 of the bill, this would severely restrict judicial reviews of agency actions. These provisions need to be deleted in their entirety, in my opinion. And right now, we're dealing with an administration that will take any action, legal or not, that I'm seeing, that will only check against those illegal actions in the judiciary, and we need to make sure we preserve that ability. And so the second area that I wanted to point out in this hearing was Section 121, which shortened the statute of limitations from 6 years to 120 days. I believe some shortening may be appropriate, but do not believe it should be reduced to less than 1 year. We should not limit who has standing to bring these challenges. And finally, in Section 106 of the bill, this would shift when environmental reviews happen from prior to agency actions to after those actions have already happened, essentially making the reviews meaningless. This bill is already watering down the NEPA and ESA reviews that will happen, but it's critical that those reviews continue to happen prior to projects commencing. A final concern with the bill that I'll mention and really lead into a question is the proposed increase in categorical exclusions up to 10,000 acres. And so, Mr. Houck, if you don't mind, because you have the best haircut of everybody up there, can you please talk about what the impact would be on both the environmental reviews and community participation if categorical exclusions were increased from 3,000 acres all the way up to 10,000 acres?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question. My experience in Gunnison County, and I think it would probably be applicable to maybe the Pine Barrens as much as the Rocky Mountain West, but the idea that having the communities that are closest to this involved in that process are important, and my concern with the watering down or the lowering of or increasing the threshold for these categorical exclusions would be that it doesn't allow the more robust issues to be discussed in a way where there's upfront input from local government, from industry, and also from other folks in the communities that are invested, and then on the back end, what they're going to do is litigate in order to slow things down. And so sometimes the idea of going slow to go fast is there. I agree that there's opportunities for reform. I think that this bill has the seeds of that. And when I look at the Wildfire Commission report, it seems to be that would be kind of a good North Star to find some direction about how to mold and shape some of the...
So answer me this, and if you answer it as well as that first question, I'm going to do a sense of the Senate resolution that you can become an honorary New Jerseyan. But can you please just sort of expand on your written testimony, which I thought was really pointed, that NEPA and ESA have not been a problem in developing and implementing vegetation management projects, and say more about what the real causes of the delay in project implementation are in your view, because I believe we need to cut bureaucracy and get things done, but it seems like you were saying that the delay in project implementation is not the NEPA and ESA.
Yep. What I've experienced in Gunnison County and in western Colorado is often it's the contracting, the time it takes the contracting and getting the resources on the ground after the environmental analysis has been done. That has been more of an impediment to getting good work done on the ground in my neck of the woods than the actual NEPA process.
Free tolls on the Jersey Turnpike. Thank you very much, sir.
Is that for everybody, Senator?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir. Bennett must pay.
There you go. Thank you so much. Senator Bennett, any closing remarks?
No, I just want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's been an excellent hearing, Chair. I know you had a million places to be. Thank you. It's critically important to our country and grateful. And to the witnesses, thank you all. It was a pleasure to hear the depth of your knowledge. the depth of your commitment, and I think there's a broad view that we can move forward on here, and I look forward to working with you, Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator Bennett. A big thank you to our witnesses again. I know that this was short notice. You gave up personal time. You put this together, and your statements will be reviewed over and your questions as well. The records will be open for 5 business days. I want to say a big thanks to our staff members, too. Both the ranking members of my personal staff, the committee members on both sides of the aisle did an incredible job of putting this together. Made a very, very, very productive meeting as well. And I think this says a lot. The House, Speaker Johnson saying this is a priority to get it across the finish line this early in a Congress. I appreciate the chairman and ranking member of the larger committee saying this is a priority to have a hearing as well. What we don't have much up here is oxygen. There's just a finite amount of issues we can get across the finish line. I do think this is something we can get across the finish line and look forward to working with the ranking member and his team as well. So today's hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.